Well, greetings and a warm welcome to all, everyone here in the loft, everyone out there in Zoom land, and the vision trained people. Welcome, welcome. Also, everyone on the recording. Welcome to this introductory session of Human Not by Nature. Human Not by Nature. Carl Jung and Rudolf Steiner on human nature. Someone asked me about the title of this series. If the human is not by nature, then what makes us human? This title really holds a seed question for this series. It is a question that is meant to make us wonder. And it's good to have questions that make us wonder. When I did my training as a Waldorf school teacher, which is an educational movement based on the insights of Rudolf Steiner, I was taught that wonder should be the basis of learning. And you know what I thought? I didn't think anything. It just made me wonder. But intuitively, I believed it. And I allowed that idea to work on me, on my inner life. And it opened me up to wonder. And from there, it opened me up to a world that is wonderful. It truly is. No matter what things seem bad, discouraging, disheartening, when you stand back and look at it objectively, you're hard pressed to not say that the world is full of wonder. From the things of nature, such as when I go up north in winter and stay warm by the wood stove, I wonder how all those animals survive outside, even in the coldest nights of winter. Sure, science may explain it in scientific terms, but it still fills me with wonder. Even the things that humans achieve can fill us with wonder. The other day, I stepped outside, looked up into the sky, and observed a distant airplane silently soaring across the clear blue sky, as if this was just an ordinary, everyday thing, which it is. But I wondered how we ever got to this point where hundreds of people get into a metal machine and fly in the air. I am filled with wonder. Again, science can explain it in scientific terms, but the point is, it all begins with wonder. It took wonder to figure out how to do this flying thing. Similarly, there is an old proverb that says, reverence is the beginning of wisdom. Today, we're all suffering somewhat from the fire hose effect, where knowledge is being pumped at us as if through a fire hose. And there seems little space or time for a modern human being to acknowledge and appreciate knowledge, let alone have reverence for it. Knowledge is now treated as a commodity rather than a blessing. Knowledge is taken for granted. However, throughout history, and maybe even as much today, there can be the suppression and manipulation of knowledge, because knowledge and freedom go hand in hand. As I heard it said many times during the pandemic, whoever controls the narrative controls the world, controls what humans believe. And as we will see in the series, belief is the basis of behavior. So at the outset, I want to set the tone that we consciously develop a sense of wonder, to be grateful and appreciate the blessings of knowledge. When treated with reverence, it can lead to freedom. Because as with the human itself, neither knowledge nor freedom is necessarily by nature. It's not necessarily a naturally occurring thing of nature. And so with this opening session, We stand before a door at a threshold with many questions yet to be answered, questions that can fill us with wonder. Why are we here? How did we get here? What are we doing here? Where is it going? When will it end? Or as my sister used to say, in a word, huh? Science is often good at giving us reasons for the what and how, but not necessarily good at telling us why. The usual default answer is that there is no reason to it all. Just meaningless, random chaos that somehow sorts itself into, well, us. Doesn't that make you wonder? I have a book here that I've been reading, Why Evolution is True, by Jerry Cohn. The first endorsement on the back is from Richard Dawkins, who you might know is unequivocally black and white in his views regarding evolution versus anything spiritual. In the introduction, there's a quote from Michael Shermer. Darwin matters because evolution matters. Evolution matters because science matters. Science matters because it's the preeminent story of our age, an epic saga about who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. It's a powerful quote, and with which I wholeheartedly half agree. First of all, who is this Michael Shermer? I looked him up to discover he's the publisher of Skeptic magazine and also executive director of the Skeptics Society. It's helpful to know where someone is coming from so you know where they want to take you. Skeptic magazine is focused on investigating pseudoscientific theories and intent on falsifying anything that cannot be proven by scientific means, which is fine and well. We want to be careful about what we believe, because as I stated, belief is the basis of behavior. So scientific methodology is important and matters. And if there's anything I learned during the COVID-19 pandemic, is that science is not about trusting the science, as was often spouted, but rather science is about not trusting the science. Scientific methodology is about doubt, debate, and disbelief. Scientific methodology is about questioning the science, debating the facts, challenging the evidence. So I agree with Mr. Shermer, we need to be skeptical about all claims. Skepticism is a cognitive power that operates on a basis of doubt as opposed to faith. Now, the power of faith has its place, but we don't ever want science to become like a faith-based religion, just a story we make up, tell ourselves, tell our children, because we want to tell ourselves we've got things figured out. Speaking of this tension between faith-based religion and scientific inquiry, another book I've been reading, a biography, Darwin, The Life of a Tormented Evolutionist. Interesting title, The Life of a Tormented Evolutionist. Why was Charles Darwin, someone we associate as a central proponent of evolution, with his groundbreaking book on the origin of species, published in 1859, a tormented evolutionist? And why did he wait decades before publishing his book? Well, Darwin was born in England and raised in the orthodoxy of the Church of England, and was even training to be a clergy. But as the scientific revolution was well underway at that point, his education included heavy doses of scientific theory. And he and everyone else were feeling torn between the centuries-old church dogma, preached from the pulpit, and the new ideas being debated in the lecture halls. There was something of a collective cognitive dissonance that was part of the collective unconscious and becoming increasingly conscious. Darwin paused his training to become a country pastor and instead pursued his passion as an amateur naturalist, accompanying the voyage of the HMS Beagle. Returning from this adventure to remote parts of the planet, he had collected an immense amount of specimens pertaining to everything from geology to paleontology, which he began to slowly piece together a new view of how things came into existence. Up to this point, most people held to the church doctrine of special creation. Special creation is the idea that the universe and all things in it came about by divine decree. That creation was something of an instantaneous act, producing all life the way they are in present form, and the human being placed within the midst of that in finished form. The reason it's referred to as special creation is because it was considered not possible by purely scientific means to understand the processes used in the creation by the Creator. And this is really not so off the mark even today. Science still does not understand how things came into existence, the origin of the universe. There are many vying theories, the most commonly held one being the Big Bang theory, but there are still plenty of scientists not convinced of this. And even if it is true, it still leaves many unanswered questions. What was before the Big Bang? What was around this minuscule dot of power and energy? What's going to come after it? And who or what set this all up to begin with? These sorts of questions tend to get glossed over. So for Darwin to begin speaking of a new view, that things did not come into being overnight, but rather evolved over time, was really in the realm of heresy. And as he put it, like confessing a murder. It was both welcomed and frowned upon to spout ideas that ran counter to the religious orthodoxy that had been the glue holding society together for centuries. It was like driving a nail into the heart and faith of people who held a belief that life is guided by some sort of higher intelligence. So the torment Darwin felt was not just for himself, but that all of society was facing an existential crisis. It was facing a wake-up call to reevaluate its beliefs, which many feared would lead to a rise in immoral behavior, as people disbanded the idea that they were descended from God in exchange for the idea that they had ascended from apes. At the time of Darwin, the ideas around evolution, which had already got some traction with a book even his grandfather had written, Zoonomia, but these ideas were rapidly becoming based in evidence, were a direct challenge to church doctrine and church authority. So Darwin was on shaky ground socially. Thus, he was tormented. It wasn't until a fellow inquirer, Alfred Wallace, and I refer to him as a fellow inquirer because ironically, neither of them had any formal training in science. Wallace finished his formal education at age 14. And as I said, Darwin had been training to be a clergy. But it wasn't until Wallace reported on his own discoveries on his voyages, amassing similar evidence to Darwin, that Darwin's hand was pressed to publish his ideas after waiting so long. But it seems to me there may have been something else holding his hand back, tormenting him. Perhaps even though he had amassed a tremendous amount of evidence showing that species do evolve, he still had niggling doubts about the absoluteness of his theory of evolution. After all, his ideas were flying in the face of every belief, of every culture, of every historical period, by presenting a godless picture of the world. He was about to proclaim a precedent-setting theory. Now, my theory is that Darwin unconsciously, or perhaps partly consciously, felt that his book was unfinished, that his theory was an incomplete picture. And this is what tormented him. He hadn't published it because it wasn't really ready to be published. There was, and still is, more work to be done on the theory of evolution. But seeing that Alfred Wallace was potentially going to beat him and presenting his ideas on natural selection, it forced Darwin's hand, and out came his book and ideas into the world, causing a great furor and division, as it still does. It's interesting to note that so many people around the world, in fact, the vast majority of people in the world, still hold to the idea of some sort of divine presence informing things of the natural world. Why do so many people not want to fully disband the idea of a god or gods in exchange for a scientific explanation? As Michael Shermer stated, science matters because it is the preeminent story of our age, an epic saga about who we are, where we come from, and where we are going. People want a story. They want a saga that holds them in wonder about who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. But does the scientific picture satisfy the souls of humans? Does Darwin's theory satisfy the soul as the stories of old did? And I question Mr. Shermer's assertion that science does tell us who we are, where we come from, and where we're going. Because the default reason in science usually is there's no reason. It's meaningless, random chaos that somehow assembled itself into humans, you and me. I want to move out of our heads for a moment here and go into our hearts with something of an aesthetic break. I want to show you a series of pictures, each depicting life on Earth in different ways. Here we have a picture taken by NASA, looking at planet Earth from the outside. There's a beautiful blue planet, round, clouds, water. Yeah. Picture of life on Earth. Next one. When I was working in the Waldorf schools in the lower grades, they always had some sort of picture like this. This is a painting of the Madonna by Raffaello, not Raphael, but Raffaello, Italian artist. And they always had a painting like this in the kindergartens and the lower grades because they wanted this to be the message sent to the children, that this is the environment that they're growing up in. This is what the world looks like. Maybe not scientifically, but artistically. Another beautiful painting. Child sucking at the breast. In the background here we have a hummingbird sucking at a blossom. Mother and child, image of the earth. painting. This includes the father this time. The power of the pair producing a third, the child in the middle, and this heart shape made by their two bodies. Or is this an image of Earth? Stages of metamorphosis. One stage to another. Creature becoming a flying butterfly. Drawing of the Earth, grid lines. We often show ourselves this just to show the Earth divided up geometrically, quantitatively. And of course, the ubiquitous globe found in most classrooms. This is the world you live in. Or this. There's the world on the blackboard, according to Albert Einstein. Or this. More of a mystical image by an alchemical artist. Any thoughts or feelings looking through that series of pictures? As I said, you know, an image of a mother and child has this nurturing sense to it, less objective and more subjective, which can help a person to be in their body more. You know, when we honor our subjective experience, it allows us to be in our body. And a lot of people are suffering by not being in their body. You know, when they're on video games and that just sucks them out through their eyeballs. Mm-hmm. So an environment that subjectively feels good is going to make them feel safe and want to be there and be present. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So these images of the globe and things like that, you know, they're more qualitative, more objective, whereas the artistic impressions are more quantitative and subjective. All should, because we're all so self-centric. And that's part of the call here, is to go beyond the self-centrism and to be able to empathize and see things from other perspectives, from other people's perspectives. But it begins with understanding, you know, what is our perspective. And that was the assignment I was just about to get into there, is to give you all a moment of introspection, to contemplate how you were raised. What were the images of life you were raised with? What was the belief system you were raised with regards to the origin of the human and what life on planet Earth is about? What sort of pictures were instilled within you? And do these images and beliefs remain the same, determining your behavior? Or have they gone through any sort of, shall we say, evolution, transmutation? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes right now to start this inquiry into your own biography. And this will also be the assignment for the week, to contemplate what images you were raised with and so forth. Okay, we won't take time for sharing on that at this moment. But as I said, that will be your human assignment over the week. And I'll reiterate that again at the end. But you can see we are engaging ourselves not only with scientific dialogue here in this series, but also engaging ourselves artistically. In culture, we often speak of the arts and sciences. We speak of them in the same breath, the arts and sciences. We do this because they're both cultural phenomenon, both powerful forces, but each in a different way. They're equal in power, but touch us in different ways. They each address a different part of us. One is like the right arm and the other like the left arm. We might say the one activates the right brain, the other the left brain. And it's important to be mindful of this. As Carl Jung put it, it is only when we are balanced that we can see straight. Otherwise, our vision is skewed. And we don't want to be biased towards either side. Otherwise, this will bias our experience. And we will only see the things the way we want to see them, which is a constant danger for a scientist. As the saying goes, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And so we will do some artistic activity in this series to balance ourselves and prepare ourselves to see. Science has the power to reveal things to us, but art also has the power to reveal. We need both of these powers on board. Otherwise, our ideas will be half-baked, incomplete, as I suggest Darwin's theory of evolution is, which can lead to incomplete beliefs. And we know beliefs are the basis of behavior. So how will our actions be influenced if our beliefs reflect only half the reality? Ideas that we hold in our mind are important components of our humanity. Ideas are as much a part of our makeup as the bones and organs of our bodies. The type and quality of ideas we hold are extremely important. If someone came into the room where you are there right now and said, the building is on fire, if you believe them and act on that idea, you're going to get up and get out. Or even if you aren't 100% believing them, you'll still probably move to investigate and to act. Beliefs are the basis of behavior. And even if they're half-baked beliefs or erroneous beliefs, they're still ideas in our mind and part of the total content of our psyche. If there's anything the pandemic taught me, it's important to get the right ideas, the right information, to get them straight and as congruent as possible, which was very difficult to do. But it's essential to do so you can decide for yourself how you want to act. And if you don't have the right thoughts and ideas in mind, and it's causing confusion and perhaps emotional turmoil, then fortunately, there's something you can do. Any guesses? What can you do? Think. That's it. Think. Thinking is something you can do. Thinking, and Rudolph Steiner's view, is the new spirituality. Not just ordinary, everyday thinking you use when deciding what to get at Krispy Kreme donuts. No, we're talking about spiritualized cognition, living thinking. Thinking that includes powers of the feeling realm and powers of the will. I love to coin words, as you may have noticed. And I've coined the term thought artist or thartist. A thartist is one whose domain is the realm of thoughts. Sculptors sculpt with clay, painters work with paint, textile workers work with textiles. Thartists work with thoughts, sculpting ideas, fashioning them. They take a raw, unfinished thought and make it more complete, more true, more expressive of an idea or concept. We all need to become better Thardists in this information age where we're suffering from the fire hose effect. Ideas gushing at us from our smartphone screen, one swipe after another. We need to be able to enter courageously and skillfully into the domain of our own thinking being, where thoughts, feelings, intentions, impulses of all sorts reside, and work with them. Work with them rather than always looking for more ideas from the outside. This is where the real lab of life is, in your interior. The lab where the past, present, and future all intersect in you. And this is where we'll be going as we enter the depth psychology of Carl Jung and the spiritual science of Rudolf Steiner, where we can truly understand more, to work through with our skepticism to a place of knowing and understanding more of where we're coming from and where we're going, what we are, and what we're doing here. That's the unfinished business of being human, and the unfinished chapters of Charles Darwin's legacy. And it's leaving us all in something of a torment. I'm sure it wasn't easy for Darwin to cast aside an idea of life that includes something of a spiritual impulse for one that is devoid of that and rests upon a completely materialistic and mechanistic model of life. No question the mind would struggle with that. No doubt his heart did for decades before finally publishing. There was some thardistry yet to be done. Darwin's theory of evolution, even though an unfinished theory and has been greatly advanced since then, now referred to as neo-Darwinism, including our knowledge of genetics, had the power to drive a wedge between the doctrine of churchianity and the newly rising scientism. This was in some ways welcomed, this wedge, as it was a social force to dethrone the political power of the Church of England at that time. But as a scientific theory, as a story, a saga, is it satisfying to the soul? Or does it gloss over the questions, who are you? Where do you come from? And where are you going? We may yet together here have to do some finishing of Darwin's unfinished thardistry. There's another term I like, not one that I coined, but it's a real thing. I've seen it in Wikipedia. Cartesian anxiety, named after René Descartes. It refers to the sense of alienation we feel when our experience of life is not in touch with the whole of reality. René Descartes made a big deal out of this, the split between mind and matter, between self and other, the lack of connectedness we feel in life. And this is why I teach what I teach, to help people to bridge that divide that causes Cartesian anxiety. And also when people enter the loft here, I spray them with an essential oil blend. It's called Stress Away, but I've renamed it Anti-Cartesian Anxiety Spray to help reduce the chronic, low-grade, semi-conscious, existential anxiety and ontological angst we all experience. And no doubt similar to the torment felt by Charles Darwin himself. So this series, Human Not by Nature, Carl Jung and Rudolf Steiner on human nature is about developing a more inclusive look at the human, one that includes evolution as a reality, but also includes something of the spiritual component that is entirely missing from that model. One that Rudolf Steiner referred to as spiritual evolution, which includes something of the interior reality that accompanies us in life, which Carl Jung spoke of extensively. As we dig into the perspectives of Jung and Steiner, we may discover a middle path. We're not talking about the debate between creationists and evolutionists. No, not intelligent design or any of that. We're talking about a middle path that may lead to an even bigger picture of reality than most have imagined yet. A picture that can be born out of two seemingly opposites, not unlike a male and female, opposite but complementary to each other, where something new is born in the middle. Perhaps the activity of the right brain and left brain coming together through the arts and sciences coming together. Perhaps we're looking at something of a marriage here in our own evolution. As we move into the last part of this first session, let's talk about the marriage of Carl Gustav Jung and Rudolph Lorenz Steiner in this series of 7 sessions. I could do the usual thing, sharing some pictures of them for you, which, well, why not? I'll go ahead and do that. Start with Carl Gustav Jung. Probably at the top of his game at this age. People want to know what they look like. Here's a younger Rudolf Steiner. He eventually ditched the mustache. And there he is later in life, doing his spiritualized living thinking. And of course, people want to know something of the biographies of people we're going to be studying. Jung was born and died in Switzerland between the years of 1875 and 1961. Steiner was born in Croatia in 1861 and died in 1925. When I did a Google search on Steiner to see what would come up, on the side of the search page, where you get a little thumbnail about a person, it said, Austrian architect. Well, first of all, it's true he's considered both Austrian and Croatian, because where he grew up in Croatia is now part of Austria. And coincidentally, he also died in Switzerland, as did Jung. But if you ever heard of Rudolf Steiner, you may not know that historically he's considered quite influential in the realm of architecture. And even though he had no formal training as an architect, and probably never referred to himself as an architect, what led to this sort of widespread influence that he had is what you discover about him when you dig a little deeper into Wikipedia, where it refers to Steiner as an occultist, social reformer, architect, esotericist, and clairvoyant. For me, as someone who has been interested in his work for over 40 years, hate to admit it. No, I started becoming interested at age 2. The sort of description of Steiner barely scratches the surface. To call him even a Renaissance man really doesn't do justice to the immense oeuvre and body of work he left as a legacy. But there's really 2 ways to get to know someone. One is looking at their inner life, and the other at their outer life. In the first case, one can look at the thoughts of Steiner and the over 6,000 lectures he gave that were recorded. Not recorded, unfortunately, like a YouTube video, I wish, but written down shorthand by stenographers. Some of them have been published in books, and some of them have actually been recorded by someone as audio files and published on YouTube and also at the Rudolph Steiner audio website. Many of the books have now been translated into audio files. And it's a deep well if you dare to dive in. The other way to get to know someone is through their outer life. To quote Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew, "You shall know them by their fruits." And Steiner certainly produced a lot of fruit, not only in the realm of architecture. He founded the Waldorf School movement, where I trained and taught for a number of years. Often Waldorf schools have wonderful structures, building structures, based on Steiner's indications about architecture, making them more living buildings that are more friendly for living thinking, a place where consciousness can flourish. He spoke of the tyranny of the right angle and its detrimental effect on our thinking, feeling, and willing. He also developed biodynamic agriculture, which has become famous for producing the best grapes for wine. And even though Steiner himself did not drink, he was pioneering a new method of farming that goes well beyond organic practices for producing fruits and vegetables that are, well, biodynamic. And I've worked on some biodynamic farms that are truly magical places, very alive, like a living organism. Steiner also inspired the development of the Camp Hill villages, worldwide movement of villages, community living for people with special needs. He developed eurythmy, a new form of movement and dance taught in Waldorf schools and also used as a healing practice. It's something that I've also done training in. He developed new forms of medicine. I go to a medical doctor, an MD, who's also trained in Steiner medicine. So I get alternative remedies and treatments. As you go down the list of areas that Steiner touched, you see he was really working to inspire an enlivening and renewal to all aspects of society. Aspects of society that were struggling as the place of religion was declining and social Darwinism was moving in to take its place. You could say there was really no realm that he had something to say about: politics, economics, sciences, so forth. He was seeing how the cultural forces of the past were declining and becoming impotent, and we needed to renew them through a spiritualization of them. How is it he could be so wide-ranging in his insights? This question really takes us back to the first thing we saw about him, that he was an occultist, social reformer, esotericist, and clairvoyant. His powers allowed him to see the spiritual principles and forces at work behind the material world, behind the forces at work in culture, behind the world, behind evolution. And this will become more evident as we focus primarily on Steiner's insights and thoughts over the next 2 sessions. I won't go into the ideas and fruit of Jung's life at this time, as we'll be looking at him in the 4th session. There's a lot of ground to be covered in this series. Starting next time, we will look at the occult history of the Earth and things beyond the fossil record. What is our past? What is our future? We will dive into that next week, filling in some of the missing links in Darwin's book, you could say, making it more inclusive of the spiritual influences in evolution, a spiritual evolution. We will also look at our relationship to technology and the question of transhumanism, the idea of merging with machines, which raises a lot of questions, including questions around the morality of human nature, which in itself ties into the questions around the human ego, something Jung took up in his work, working with the ego. Another question, what happens to the human ego after death? Science says nothing happens after death because you can't prove that there's anything after death. Well, you can't disprove either that there's nothing after death, that there's no life after death. Can we continue a relationship with those who have died? This was an extremely important subject for Rudolf Steiner. I have half a bookshelf of books regarding this subject of death, dying, and afterlife from Rudolf Steiner. So this is just a sampling of what will be covered in these 7 sessions, going deep and wide, working with these 2 top luminaries of our time. And all this just for the cost of showing up, unless, of course, anyone wants to make a donation for this series. Suggested donation would be $50, but I also accept love and good wishes. And don't forget, there is an email list. So if people want to be notified and reminded of this Zoom session for the next 6 Thursdays, they can get on the email list. Just send me your email. You'll know about that and other upcoming events. So in summary for this session, what are some of the highlights that were covered? I endeavored to start things off by emphasizing the need for wonder. The need for wonder in order to be truly open and let the world reveal itself and teach us. A scientist may wonder what difference wonder makes to knowing. But as Goethe once said, and Goethe is a patron saint, so to speak, of this work, Empathy with Nature, he said, science arose from poetry. When times change, the two will meet again as friends on a higher level. I'll repeat. Science arose from poetry. When times change, the two will meet again as friends on a higher level. And that is a second point made today, to bring balance to ourselves, balance between scientific inquiry and an artistic eye. Become Thardists, working with living thinking. Then maybe the world can and will reveal what Goethe called nature's open secrets. Nature's open secrets. And lastly, in the summary, to enlist the light of great luminaries, who some in a skeptical fashion may refer to as fringe or even pseudo-scientific, but sometimes light from the fringe. New light coming over the distant horizon is exactly what is needed to light our way in the dark. And in many ways, we are still in the dark. But as we grope in the dark. We may find each other. And in that finding, share the light we each bring. So thank you for listening. Thank you for listening. And now, is there anyone who has any questions or any contributions they'd like to make? We're going to have a little time for discussion, dialogue, before I give out the human home play assignment for the week, which can also be found on the Empathy with Nature page of the Power for Conscious Living website. And then when we're done with that, this music here, so if people want to hang out to meditate or make art while listening to some live music, they can do that. Could spend a lot more time looking at the type of person Darwin was, and I have over the last few weeks. I've dove into a lot of reading about him and some documentaries and so forth. And the interesting thing is that he, like so many of the great scientists, the greater scientists, were coming from a place of wonder. And I'm going to do a piece on that actually in one of the sessions coming up. I've got a book, a classic book called The Metaphysical Foundations of Science. And it looks at some of the greatest scientists, how they were coming out of a spiritual mindset to begin with. I mean, even Gregor Mendel, who, really initiated the whole thing around genetics and whatnot. He was a priest. That, Galileo and so forth, these were people that, Newton wrote more metaphysical stuff than he did scientific stuff. So these people, the great minds, were already geared into something of a spiritual mindset that allowed them to have that balance, that openness, that wonder, so they could receive what Goethe calls nature's open secrets. So that really needs to be emphasized. Thank you, Giuseppe, because we too, in our sciencing, can go there. We can go much further than we think we can in knowing the world and the realities beyond what the fossil record reveals, as we see with Rudolf Steiner's work around spiritual evolution, that we can know the occult history of the world and not just be limited to our five senses, our limited cognitive abilities, and today's scientific methodology. Steiner was pioneering a scientific methodology to allow us greater access to a greater reality. Alrighty, well, then what I'll do is give the human not by nature assignment. 3 little practices, 3 little exercises. The first one we already did. How were you raised? What ideas were put into your mind about the human and where the human comes from? Was it done dogmatically? What pictures do you still hold from your early impressions? How have they evolved over time? The second one is an artistic exercise. Draw an image of what the world looks like to you. Be intuitive. Concentrate on the feeling quality of it. Do it a few times if necessary to get closer to the essence of what you feel deeply and believe about what the world is. Does it feel wonderful? Or do you feel torment? And then the third one, which I always give out, of course, the Rückschau.
Oh, Rückschau.
Rückschau, German word for backwards review. An exercise from Steiner. Top exercise, something to do every day for the rest of your life. Take a few minutes each day to review the events of your day in reverse order. view yourself from an objective, higher perspective, going through your day backwards. What do you see? What are you shown? What do you learn about yourself? This is a way to strengthen many things, including mental picturing, memory, empathy, and self-knowledge.